when addiction is so large, like sobriety is not maintained, we're out knocking over convenience stores to pay for the habit, or actively in addiction, marriage therapy is not awesome in there. So the right kind of therapy, whether it's emotionally focused therapy, whether it's Gottman therapy, whether it's PACT therapy, if it focuses on how the couple is functioning and pushes towards a secure functioning, it can actually be really helpful for Enmeshment, because again, it gives that path of commitment. Here are the things I will and won't do in order to have the relationship that I want. And then which should be addressed first in therapy, mother enmeshment or addictions. So we let the guys know in our workshop that this is not an addiction workshop. So we're not focusing on that, but we do encourage them to be able to stay sober. We've had guys who have not been able to stay sober through the process. They go to their room at night, look at porn, act out, and they stay angry, they stay stuck. So there needs to be a level of stability where you can maintain sobriety, at least for the weekend. As far as that goes, oftentimes, whether it's trauma, enmeshment, whatever, what I found ends up happening in treatment is not, we're just focusing on this and then we'll do this. It's, we have to keep both in mind, and we've got to keep them in balance. Think about, I have construction stuff on the mind because of house projects. Think about removing a sleeve off of something. Like you have to kind of jiggle it and move both ends at once. You can't just move one end and have things removed completely. So I think it's best, if there are mother enmeshment issues, work with someone who's enmeshment informed. Because again, there are some nuances there, even as you work on addiction stuff, where an enmeshed man, he'll blow out a treatment. If, for example, you're saying you've got to commit to a 12-step therapy group and be going, if that enmeshed guy has not worked around his feelings of engulfment, you're essentially telling him to drink fire for treatment, and he's going to say no every single time. So have someone who's enmeshment informed and can do addiction work, and that's a pretty good combination.
Apologize, I dropped out there and lost my internet for a minute. It looks like you just addressed the question about enmeshment and addiction. Okay, yep. So the next one here, is there a difference between enmeshment and covert incest? Also, I have read that covert incest and overt incest have the same long-term impacts. Is that true?
So the first question, speaking from the research, there is a difference between enmeshment and covert incest, because in the research, enmeshment just describes closeness in relationships. So enmeshed is like totally close, disengaged is lots and lots of space. The space factor itself is neither, it's not pathological. It's not describing a problem. Really, what in Dr. Adams' work, he'll use the terms enmeshment and differentiation interchangeably. So in the research, you probably won't find a lot of people saying enmeshment's a problem, but they will say lack of differentiation is, and that's what we're talking about here. So that is different than covert incest. Covert incest can be a one-time occurrence. That can be I think it's rare, but it's totally possible that there can be one time that a parent sits a child down and tells them things that they shouldn't know about the parent's relationship one time. That can have an impact on a kid long-term. Normally, covert incest is a little more long-term, and in a enmeshed, lack of differentiated relationship, the door is much wider open for covert incest. Again, in Dr. Adams' work, he'll use enmeshment and covert incest almost interchangeably, which they, for all intents and purposes, when somebody gets to the point where they're reading a book like When He's Married to Mom and finding answers there, it probably doesn't matter whether it was just enmeshment or covert incest, because it probably went through the gamut of both. And then covert incest and overt incest having the same long-term impacts. Is that true? Not quite. Overt incest means there was hands-on sexual abuse. And so whenever, having those sexual boundaries crossed, even just psychically or emotionally, that's big and hairy. Don't get me wrong. But it's a different class of trauma when there's actually been trespass on the body. And so there are a lot of similar long-term impacts, but there are some differences, like in the intensity of how the symptoms are presented, in the psychological disturbance. There's differences in intensity, I would say, but the baseline stuff, it's fairly similar, but it's not the same. I wouldn't say it's the same.
Now, one of the things, and I'll just go into my own life here, is there's the line gets really fuzzy between the covert incest and the overt. Covert incest is this sexualized element, like the parent is commenting on the child's developing body, or things like that. Whereas it is walking into the bathroom when the son is in the shower, and so you can put towels away when that could have waited. Is that covert or overt? Initially I thought it was covert. It was like, well, maybe that's a little over. That voyeurism, exhibitionism thing is crossing
Yep.
a line.
That's the key there. We've had a lot of guys in the workshops whose mothers would walk around the house naked or in a towel or in her underwear, and again, it can feel like that, like, oh, great, she's doing again. This is what my mom does. But that is, like, you nailed it on the head, Scott. It's that voyeurism, that exhibitionism. The impact on a person, even if it's a close family member, is it that different than a stranger in the park saying, come over here, and then flashing you? It's the same principle. There's a boundary violated. I didn't want to see this. I didn't need to see this. That's inappropriate for you to put me in there without my consent. So yeah, that's a good point.
But where on the spectrum does something like mom sits too close and wants to hold my hand while we watch TV? Is that covert? Is that overt? Is it mom's just being friendly?
Some of it, I think, depends on the age. My 8-year-old likes to sit next to me and hold my hand when we watch TV. He likes to hold mom. Our 11-year-old, when he sees the 8-year-old do that, he kind of looks and he's like, like he's over that. So some of it depends on the developmental stage of the child. Bringing, your little child up into your lap to comfort you on a regular basis, or that's just where they like to sit. Again, developmentally, that's protective. If you're insisting that they're on your lap when they're 12, 10, 11, that's crossing a line. So it's not just the behavior itself. You have to consider the developmental space of the child. Just this weekend, my oldest was hanging out with some cousins, and they were throwing around some sexually explicit terms that they didn't know anything about, and they're a little bit above his pay grade right now. It would have crossed a line for me to say, oh, this is exactly what that means. What I told him is, in general terms, those are terms that describe sexual acts. We'll be talking about that as you get more ready for that, but just know it's a sex thing. So even sharing information with the intent of, I want this kid to be equipped, if you're sharing too detailed information too soon, you're crossing the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ken makes this point. Are you meeting the child's needs, like with your 8-year-old when he wants to snuggle, or are you meeting your needs? If you've got a 14-year-old who doesn't want to snuggle and you're insisting on it, you're meeting your needs, not the child's. And that's where we get this emotional covert incest thing.
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you explain why mother enmeshed men commonly have strong feelings of inadequacy in life, and why they are often people pleasers? Is it possible to ever heal from that?
Yes, I will explain that. And yes, it is possible to heal that. This is a quote that Dr. Adams uses. I think he uses it in his regular presentations. He also uses it in the workshop. But one participant said, this process makes me angry because I'm realizing that I've lived in the life that's been built around me rather than living the life that I choose. So if you think about that, how confident are you going to be taking on a job that you don't have power or authority to complete? That's essentially what's happening to a child when a parent co-opts them into the parenting system. Is, I'm burdening you with this information and this problem, but you don't have any power, any authority to actually solve this. There's a recipe for inadequacy. So here's a lifelong, I'm constantly in this place that I shouldn't be. I don't feel like I'm ready for it. can't do it. That's one of the reasons there's a lot of inadequacy, is you're living a life that you're not choosing and not suited for. And then the people pleasing is, it's really important. It was really important to my mother that I became a doctor because she needed a doctor in the family. In fact, she cried when I told her I wanted to go to architecture school instead of med school. The people pleasing comes from everyone's depending on me, or mom or dad is depending on me to be this certain way, to live this certain life. And so keep in mind that our personalities, they form from a couple places. Some of it's temperament, some of it's genetic, some of it's environmental. So if the environmental factor is constantly saying, this is how you do right in the world, that'll become a part of how the person understands themselves. If I'm not living to make someone else happy, or I'm not living to make you happy, I'm failing as a person. That's baked into the personality of a lot of these enmeshed men. And it is totally something that can be healed from. Again, in the workshops, we focus on helping these guys get their own emotional real estate. You may have gone to med school to become a doctor because mom wanted you to. That doesn't mean that you have to stop being a doctor. You may love it for other reasons. Get in touch with those reasons why you love it. Let that be your motivation. Not so that mom can be proud of her child, the doctor. So it's really that breaking free, not throwing all of life away, but breaking free in the motivations, breaking free in the emotions, breaking free in the reasons why we do things, that I think starts to address a lot of that inadequacy and that people pleasing.
Interestingly, it's that people pleasing that often makes mother enmeshed men really fun to date, but maybe not so great to be married to later.
Right. Because to date, you're the trophy to be won. You're the person to make happy. Well, once he takes you to the altar, now this is unbearable for me, and I've got to find some other targets to make happy, because I can't just drill down on one person and build a life together where we're both satisfied. I've got to spread myself around, because if anyone has too much of me, they're going to own me. I'll no longer be able to own myself.
Okay, are gay men who have never partnered more likely to be enmeshed than others?
I don't know, frankly. I don't know what the research says on that. I think, and Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I think it's a little more nuanced why a gay man may or may not partner than just, is he enmeshed. It's a little more complicated to be a gay man in this world than it is to be a heterosexual man. You correct me if I'm wrong there.
I don't know. I've never been a heterosexual man, but there are layers to particularly sexuality for a gay man that a straight man doesn't have to deal with, because this is not how we're supposed to be. And is it okay to tell other people, how do you know if he's gay or if he's not gay, and what if he's kind of gay but not there's just this extra layer. When you're in 7th and 8th grade and you have a crush and you're straight, it's really easy to express that crush. When you're in 7th and 8th grade and you're not straight, what do? There's a whole set of questions that you've got to ask yourself before you express anything. So, and I think that just plays into long-term life issues.
I will say, go ahead, Scott.
No, go ahead.
I will say here too, before, you've only mentioned partners, straight men. I use that frame a lot because most of the guys that come into my office and workshops are that way. We have had plenty of men who have never married due to the enmeshment issues, gay and straight. In fact, Dr. Adams was telling me one of his workshops this year, he had a guy who was like 68, and he was lamenting how it wasn't going to be possible for him to marry. That was just going to be out of the question for him. And Dr. Adams said, you still have some life in you. Don't give up on that. If you give up on that, your mother wins. Because if you don't see it as a possibility for you to be able to give your heart to somebody, that keeps that loyalty space open for her. So we see gay men and straight men who were not able to partner due to enmeshment, but I don't know if gay men are any more likely to be enmeshed than straight men.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the enmeshment, I think, comes from the mother, not the son. I mean,
Right.
No male son or female daughter wants to be enmeshed with a parent in a way that feels icky or too much.
We don't work with parents and say, watch out for this personality constellation in your child because they'll suck you right in and they might force you to enmesh with them. Like, we don't do it that way, because the way it works is the parents protect the children, not the other way around.
How do you handle the all or nothing position of guilt and obligation avoidance in relationship? Also, what if the enmeshment asks are very few and covert? How can that have such a strong impact on an adult who rarely sees his mother?
I'll take the first part. The second part of that question I'm going to have to read again because it's not quite making sense to me. But so the all or nothing position, it's changing the terms of engagement, especially with the family of origin. This is really important for the enmeshed guy to get right, because if he can't do this with his family of origin, he can't differentiate with his spouse or his partner. So what that looks like is when it comes to the family wanting something, it's never a negotiation. It's, this is what I want, this is what I can do. Now that doesn't mean that the family won't request things and can't request things. It's that the enmeshed guy has to actually, he has to process that request and decide whether or not it's actually something he can say yes to. So instead of it being the family wants me to do this or nothing, the family may decide that, and they may say, well, if you can't be all in, we don't want you. Fine. What the enmeshed guy can offer, and this is what we talk a lot about, you can break free from your family and still love them. You can break free from your family and still have a relationship. I'm a self-avowed enmeshed man in recovery, and I'm dealing with this with my family right now. We want this and this and this from you. Right now I'm in a phase where I can say A and B look really good to me. Got to change the terms of C. Can't do this. I can do this. If you want this from me, I'm happy to give that. And so you flip the script. Instead of I'm deciding whether to take or leave what you're offering, you have to decide whether to take or leave what I'm offering. Because if you can't start having relationships with your terms being a major factor there, you'll never be a good partner. You'll never be a good lover to the person that you're choosing, because that takes differentiation to do that. We have to have hard edges to bump into with each other in order to have intimacy. So I had a guy ask in the last workshop I did, so is this exactly what you're suggesting I do with my spouse? And I said, not quite, but if you don't have this part of you, this edge of you, you won't ever be effective with your spouse, because you'll just do what you did with mom with her. So when she says, do you want to sit down and watch a movie with me? And that's the last thing you want to do, you're going to say yes, and then you're going to be angry and resentful, and she'll pay a price for it. So that ability to differentiate, here's me, here's what I want, can you accept my terms? That's an important foundation. What if the enmeshment asks are very few and covert? I'm not sure
I think this is somebody who maybe lives 1,000 miles away from mom. I'm gonna make up a story for you.
Sure.
And mom doesn't call every day, but maybe calls once a week. But it's really impactful on the relationship.
It's the perceived it's a perceived threat, I guess is the best way to say it. A few years ago, I was working with a guy who went to the workshop, and as part of his preparation, he called his mother and he said, would it be okay if I became unenmeshed from you? And she said, yeah, I think that would be good. So clearly, whatever was happening in childhood was not happening now, but his nervous system, his brain, his psyche had not updated. And that's key. When it comes to breaking free from enmeshment, mom actually can't hand you liberation. She could have when you were in that developmentally. But at this point, it's the man saying, I'm breaking free. A good number of the guys that I work with, their mom has said, I think it's time for our relationship to be different. I'm on board. Tell me what's got to happen here. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens enough of the time. So it's the guy's carried sense of mom that he has to work on. That's why whether your mother's alive or not, the enmeshment issue doesn't go away, because it's now become an internal set point for you. The guilt and obligation is yours. It's not something that she's given you, and this is anymore. And this is something that a lot of spouses will complain about: is he feels like I'm such a nag. Every time I ask something, he goes through the roof. And a lot of these people are not nags, and they're not overbearing, but that's his internalized set point that he's got to work on.
Yeah, okay. So when the mother of the mother enmeshed man is the only parent that was present and sacrificed much to be the single parent, is enmeshment an unavoidable development, particularly if no uncle, teacher, coach, or other male mentor presented themselves to the young boy? Seems like this doesn't make it any less severe, but perhaps more innocent. Thoughts?
Oh yeah, and I don't know that I would say like it's the only outcome, because I know plenty of single mothers who are very deliberate about getting not just male influences, but lots of other adult influences in their child's life, because they know that's an important part of development. And for us to just have this little life raft, which that may have been what it was in the beginning. I know a lot of single mothers who know that that's not good for them as the mother, and that's not good for the child. So there is a little bit of a higher propensity in divorced single parent families. We've actually had calls from moms who have read When He's Married to Mom and said, I'm worried that I'm doing this to my child. So enmeshment doesn't come from nefarious people with ill intent. I think most of the time it comes out of situations that were bigger than mom, bigger than dad, and certainly bigger than the child. And so the level of intentionality is rarely ever something that we take into account, because it really doesn't matter. What matters is that parent, is that system able to reorient to the needs of the child? Like Scott had said earlier, is this about meeting the needs of the child, or is it about meeting my needs? And that's really where we see that the parents either get it or they don't. And again, very, very few times do I see parents where like that's their aim, is I want to own you. It's I'm insecure, I'm unstable, and I am not able to do for myself, so I'm relying on you.
Next one here. My husband is planning to take Dr. Adams' workshop, which he may get you or Dr. Adams, depending on which one he takes. He spoke with Dr. Adams, and he told my husband that he should not share with me about the course. He's a sex addict who's lied to me and kept secrets for 20 years. So can you explain this to me? What is the rationale?
I saw this one last week, and I'm so glad this came across. This comes up in every workshop that I do. My 8-year-old really likes to bake, mostly because anything that's a delivery vehicle for chocolate is okay with him. We had to work on this early on, because little kids are impulsive, and he would want to open the oven every couple minutes to see how the cookies were doing. And we would tell him, we have this tried and true recipe. We know that it takes 13 minutes exactly in the oven. So we get the temperature right, we put the cookies in, and 13 minutes later we check on them, and 90% of the time they're done. He didn't understand why with the cake or the cookies, why you couldn't open the oven and look in all the time. And we explained to him what the heat difference is, the heat fluctuation. If you check in on it too much, the process doesn't finish the way that it's supposed to. When it comes to the workshop itself, so now, especially where we're doing it over Zoom, I've had guys in the workshop that every night they're trying to sit down with their spouse and say, this is what happened. And they're trying to explain this process that's largely happening internally to them, to someone who's not engaged in the process. And inevitably, they're going to say something that their spouse says, now, wait a minute, what's happening there? Please, please, please understand, we are not here to make an enemy out of anybody in the enmeshed man's life, even a spouse. We understand when a lot of these guys come in with complaints about their spouse, that's not what we're dealing with. So we're not saying, yeah, you got to get out of there, or yeah, she's terrible or he's terrible. we're directing him back into himself. What does that mean? What are you going to do about it? Where does that come from? So it's not, don't say anything about it. It's during the process. Please stay separate, maintain your ritual space, let the baking process finish. And then with the guys I worked with a couple weeks ago, we talked about how to come down off the mountain. So you're up here having this experience. A lot of things are changing over these 4 days. You're getting perspective. Let's talk about how you can go back, and we cover that in the workshop. How can you go back and share what is important and necessary and helpful for your spouse to know? And that's an important part of the process too. We don't want these guys to just come off the mountain as hermits and say, it's all about me. We end them up on Sunday in a place where they can embrace the commitments they have in their life. They can recommit, they can fully commit. So the rationale is when you try to explain a psychological process that's going on for you while it's going on for you, you're not going to explain it well, and you're probably going to cause more problems than you're going to solve with that. So we just ask through the process of the workshop that you disconnect. After the fact, great to talk about in marital therapy, great to talk about with your spouse, great to share some of those insights.
Thank you. I wanted to answer that one too. I'm glad we got to it. Can a mother enmeshed man also be parentified or covertly sexualized by the father? So do fathers do this to kids as well?
Yeah. I think what we see most often, because in our society, females are the primary caregivers. We see the dynamic happen with mother most often because mother's most present. That's not to say that it can't happen with men, or there's some like protective factor in men that they don't do this to each other. They certainly do. It does look a little bit different when dad does it. The impacts are a little bit different than when dad does it. But I think we look at the mother side because by and large in our society, that's who is caring for children. Mostly that's who's spending the most time with them.
What if we are intrinsically empathetic, but it is something we weren't taught properly as a child/youth and struggle with as an adult, which also leads to acting out addictive behavior?
Yeah, so empathy is not a, empathetic is not a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a temperament feature. Empathy is actually a skill set that we learn. Sensitivity is a temperament feature. The closeness with which we watch another person, that kind of social mutuality, that is a temperament feature. Those are things that go into empathy, and they can make empathy either easier for us or not easier, but empathy is actually a skill that we learn. So what we see with a lot of these enmeshed people is their temperament as infants, they're very sensitive. They do have that, they watch things socially very closely, not out of survival, that's just who they are. When that is taken and exploited rather than taught and protected, to really help a kid learn empathy, you also have to teach them boundaries. Otherwise, they turn into the people pleaser or the person who operates on pity, not really on empathy. So empathy is taught, and it definitely needs to. What I see with the enmeshed guys, if their empathy is too accessible to everybody, their sensitivity, their kindness is too accessible to everybody, of course that leads to acting out, or antisocial type behavior, because they don't have the ability to say, no, I'm spent for today. I need to replenish the stores, and then I can come back and give later.
Okay, I'm going to jump to some enmeshment questions that made it into the Q&A. Didn't make the first episode, so I apologize if this hasn't been answered. My husband's mom died when he was 12. We've been married 31 years. He's been obsessed with me, possessive, controlling over my time. I wonder if my husband can be enmeshed with me.
So we talked about this in the first one. I'd go back and watch it. A lot of these guys, they either pick someone who's just like mom, or they provoke her to be like that, or they pick the dynamic that's similar, or they provoke the dynamic. So go back and watch the first one on YouTube, because we definitely do talk about that.
Yeah, that's available on YouTube, sexandrelationshiphealing.com. You'll see John's face, just click it. This is somebody who's with a sex addict. What are the key signs or symptoms that will help me see if he is or isn't enmeshed to mom?
I would say one of the key signs is both of you sit down either together or separately, go to overcomingenmeshment.com and watch some of the videos and see what comes up. What I notice with the guys who are enmeshed, when they either read When He's Married to Mom or watch a video, they either get angry or feel sick when they watch it because it's telling their story. So those are some good things. If he's having problems keeping the relationship primary, that can be an enmeshment side, especially if it's like mom, what's the word I'm looking for? Mom gets the priority over anybody, or family gets the priority over anybody. That's a sign. That's the surefire diagnostic criteria, is if the relationship structure is built around mom pleasing family. That's a surefire sign he's enmeshed. There's a lot of other things that enmeshed guys do that other people do too. But that's really what we're looking for, is that relationship structure, that personality structure is centered around mom.
Yeah, I would suggest watching that video or reading Ken's books. When I first read Silently Seduced, which was his very first book a long time ago, I almost vomited. I mean, really, I was that ill over it. Let's do a couple. You mind, John, if we hang out for a couple more minutes? Does mother enmeshment look different between men and women?
Yes. Yeah. When we have workshops specifically for women, in the workshops with women, we cover mom and dad, because women more likely are playing a dual role there with both parents. And of course, there's some societal and cultural impacts on women that we don't see on men. So I forget who's running. Is it Aaron? Yeah, Aaron Weiss is running our women's workshops right now. We just had a women's workshop a couple weekends ago. Again, a fantastic experience. We've got some videos on overcomingenmeshment.com that speak specifically to women as well.
And then let's take one more real quick. Can enmeshment and trying to please your mother lead to an avoider imprint?
Oh yeah, because once you realize that you're on a fool's errand, that you actually can't do it, but when you've got the guilt and obligation and the commitment going there, that's the only way to deal with it, is to say I'm doing it but not, make it look like I'm engaged in this, but really I'm not. So yeah, these enmeshed guys that I've worked with in the workshops and in my office, they are some of the most avoidant people I've ever met, and eventually as they get to know each other, it's actually something they kind of trade war stories. We laugh about just the lengths they've gone to in order to avoid. That's definitely something that we target with a laser focus in the workshops.
Thank you, John. Thank you everybody for being here. This recording will go up on our YouTube channel along with the other one. If you have trouble finding them, just email me, scott@seekingintegrity.com. and I will send you the links. I'll be happy to do that. I asked John to do this if he wanted to do it. He said yes. Dr. Ken Adams signed off on it. I think this has been such a great service in your last two sessions. We'll be back to our normal, just talking about relationships in 2 weeks. We do this every other week, the second and fourth Thursday. It used to be Tuesday, now it's Thursday. So thank you, John. Thank you on behalf of everybody who's been here. Is there anything you want to say to take us out?
Just thank you everybody for coming and for the great questions. I'll look forward to seeing a lot of you in the future.
All right. Thanks everybody. Have a good day. Thanks, John.